Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted to be talking on this episode with comics creator Andrew Wildman. Andrew, thank you for jumping in and thank you for joining.
No, you're welcome. It's good to be in here having a chat.
Yeah. Always glad to talk to creatives and folks that are that have created stories and are creating stories. And you certainly have a long list of titles and work. I wrote down several that are among my favorites, and so I'll just mention these briefly, and then we can hit some that are not on the list if there are mile markers that you want to throw in.
Mm.
2000 AD, of course, being one of
Wow.
those. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Beast Wars, Captain Planet. You worked on Captain Planet of all things. Um,
I did, yeah.
yeah. Nightman, which was
Yeah.
my favorite Malibu character by far, Nightman. RoboCop, X-Men Adventures, and Thundercats. So lots of creative storytelling from you
Yeah, yeah.
over the
You picked
years.
on some of the kind of like slightly, you know, not peripheral ones, but yeah, some of the ones that people probably won't know me for.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy those. I enjoy the stories that are sort of on the periphery sometimes, and it's interesting to find all sorts of stories in comics. So I appreciate all of those. Any that I missed that you want to make sure to throw in there?
Oh, crikey. Okay. Well,
You have a lot in the world of Transformers, of course.
yeah, lots of Transformers. I mean, you mentioned 2000 AD, so I think I did just two little things for 2000 AD.
Hmm.
Because I was very much in the UK, young comic book artists who were just beginning to get work would either be 2000 AD kind of based,
Hmm.
or they would be Marvel UK based. And I was definitely the Marvel camp. As a reader, I was always a Marvel fan, probably more than DC. I did read DC, but I was a bit more a Marvel fan than DC.
Hmm.
Um, and so I tended to do Marvel UK stuff. So you mentioned Thundercats in there, which I
Hmm.
think was the first thing I did for Marvel UK. Um, but I did some Galaxy Rangers, um, Real Ghostbusters,
Hmm. Hmm.
Marvel UK, and also, but prior to all of that, the first thing I did in comics was for a UK company called London Editions, and they used to do reprints of DC stuff, but they also did a He-Man comic and a Brave Star comic.
Hmm. Hmm.
That was kind of the first stuff I ever had published. He-Man and Brave Star, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's not a bad way to begin a career.
No, it's great.
So what was it about comics that drew you in and made you sort of say that this is the space that I want to create in?
Yeah, well, so in the UK, the comics situation was slightly different than it was in the US. So obviously, since 1939, you've had Superman and onwards,
Hmm.
and certainly similar kind of material before that as well. But over in the UK, we didn't really have superheroes. Only books that were slightly influenced by American sort of popular culture. But in the
Hmm.
UK, it was mostly black and white comics about football, as in soccer,
Hmm.
um, or about the Second World War, um, or kind of comedy books, just fairly slapstick, which I don't know what equivalent you'd have had over there, like Garfield or Beetle Bailey or whatever. I don't know, that kind of more cartoony stuff, Dennis the
Hmm.
Menace. Um, and I loved comics as a kid, those very British comics, and certainly the war comics and the football comics, the art in those, I was very inspired by when I was very young. And I loved drawing. I mean, I loved comics and I loved cartoons, Disney and all that kind of stuff. So I would always be doing little drawings from a very, very early age.
Hmm.
But then I think it was probably in about 1966 or seven, maybe 66, I encountered my first Marvel comic, American Marvel comic, on holiday with my family in the south of England. I was very young, obviously, um, sort of preschool age, and I was just completely blown away by it. I
Mhm,
mean, one of the things that was most noticeable about American comic books, which we didn't have so much of here, was that they were in color. I was like,
mhm,
wow,
mhm,
we were all black and white comics, or maybe two colors. There'd be black and white, but colored with maybe just red tones or whatever. But it was color comics quite a rare thing. The handy size of them as well. They were just a nice kind of handy little size.
mhm,
But the power of the stories, I mean, it really was like, myths and legends, almost godlike characters relative to the characters that we read in British comic books. I was completely
mhm,
blown away by those. Um, I think the first two books I bought were one was an Avengers book and one was a Captain America book.
mhm.
I
Nice.
think, which I still have those. They're very, they're not in very good condition anymore. Um, no, I was completely fascinated by them, and from then that was it. From the age of like 7 or 8, I thought this is what I want to do,
Mhm,
something like this. It was very much either going to be that or animation,
mhm,
but comics just constantly seemed to win out. It seemed like, in some ways, it seemed like an easier course to follow because it's drawing, coming up with ideas, drawing cool stuff, whereas animation as a very at a very young age, it's like, well, I don't really know how they work. Well, I kind of know
mhm,
how they work, but how the hell did you do that? Like,
mhm.
what is a rostrum camera? You know,
Right.
I had no idea. So comics kind of won out.
Yeah, lots of patience in animation, and it does seem to be sort of like magic in a way. You'd have to really like drawing the same thing over
Yeah,
and over again. Yeah, yeah. Uh, you mentioned the handy size of comics in the United States. I'm curious, what was the format like when you were growing up? Was it more newspaper, like fold over kind of style, or just a different sort of dimension?
yeah. I mean, similar kind of format, but just bigger. I mean, like 2000
Mhm,
AD. The very pulpy kind of paper,
mhm, mhm,
black and white, slightly bigger format than American comic books. Some of them even bigger, but they were always bigger. We didn't have comic books quite that small, that handy kind of fold it once, put it in your back pocket size. We did.
right, right.
Quite big, quite big and very easily disposable, and you know, not very durable, just cheap paper.
Yeah,
Uh,
gotcha. Gotcha.
Shiny covers? No, we didn't have those.
Well, the printing quality now is, I mean, it's very fine condition, but of course the cost has gone up quite a lot
Yeah,
too at the same
yeah,
time.
an awful lot. Yeah, I mean, comics
Yeah.
were cheap, very
Hmm.
cheap. And also the thing with British comics was that they were weekly,
Hmm.
so they had
Hmm.
to be more affordable, really, to be a weekly offering. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I mentioned several of those titles. I'm curious about the kinds of stories that you're drawn to when you take on something creative. What's sort of the most inspiring place for you?
um, well, my comics career, I guess, was very dominated by Transformers, not necessarily by choice, just by opportunity. It came along and I was offered it and I did it. I never wanted to draw Transformers. I wanted to draw superheroes, which is why I enjoyed Thundercats. In the UK,
Mhm.
getting Thundercats was a nice one to get because it felt like a bit of a test ground to getting towards superheroes.
Yeah.
Um, but when Transformers came along, what was fortunate about that was the kind of hands-off approach that Marvel US had in relation, in their relationship with Marvel UK. So they let the writers and editors at Marvel UK who were doing the UK Transformers books to pretty much do what they like as long as they didn't mess with the franchise too much.
Hmm.
So that meant then that writers like Simon Furman, who were big sci-fi fans, really kind of took the sci-fi route and in quite a mature way in a lot of instances. They didn't treat it like a kid's book.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so so what I quickly realized is that as much as I didn't want to draw robots, I wanted to draw superheroes. I quickly realized that actually Transformers offered something in terms of its narrative that was very much close to my heart, which was more of the kind of sci-fi approach, and also just those kind of quite character. I mean, all comics, Marvel Comics books were character driven, but there was something about the scope of a book that was more sci-fi based that you could go really broad with it.
Hmm.
And Simon was very much doing that, not just in terms of the landscapes that you were playing inside of, but emotionally with the characters, because they were very, very diverse characters covering a huge kind of scope of, I don't know, not just the universe, but in many, many senses. And the fact that they weren't just human-esque characters, they transformed into other things. So I mean, if you're going to do that, that's going to mess with your mind, isn't it? If your
Hmm.
body has the ability to change that way, so I think it does open up the possibility of slightly different um, character situations, existential conversations, even, and that's kind of where Simon was wanting to go with it as well. So that was
Yeah.
great. So I really enjoyed that uh, as a playing with that kind of narrative. Um, I still wanted to do superhero books, and I even still found that when I eventually got to do superhero books, I like the very human moments, the very
Hmm.
character-driven moments. Um, with all of the stuff I've done, as much as it's kind of fun to do a good fight scene or a good action scene,
Right, right. Yeah.
that that didn't necessarily inspire me. It's kind of nice to play around with the poses and all that kind of thing, but that was just like bashing your toys together, but
Hmm.
getting into the nuances of the characters was the kind of stuff that I really liked. Working
Yeah.
on facial expressions, really, really trying to get across what was being experienced by the characters.
Yeah. And I like that human side that comes through with so many characters, the things that they're going through. So even though there's something, really supernatural or outlandish about some of the science fiction elements, there's still that thread of humanity, that heart of the story that comes through.
Yeah, and the best fictional narratives do have that, and even the biggest, broadest sci-fi, kind of adventures very definitely have to have that, and that's what
Hmm.
keeps them grounded, and that's what makes you care about the people who are going through that journey or that adventure. And you
Yeah.
need to do that. You need to care for the characters to be fully on board.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's just noise and color.
Right. Yeah. True. Very true. So we mentioned some mile marker titles. I'm curious about some of the people over the years that have been particularly positive collaborations, maybe folks in the industry that were especially kind and helpful in your creative journey.
Yeah, early on when I went to art college and I studied graphic design, specializing in illustration. And in my final year at art college, I would go into London and I joined a little group of other artists called the Society of Strip Illustration.
Hmm. Hmm.
And because this is pre-internet, so communication was not a particularly easy thing to do back in the early 80s. Um, so so you didn't chat online with anyone. There wasn't any of that. So you literally had to get on a train, go to London, go to a pub somewhere, and actually meet people in person, and then get into conversation and establish relationships.
Hmm.
Uh, and so the Society of Strip Illustration was originally a group set up by some of the artists and writers that worked in the newspaper industry in London. So doing like newspaper strips, comedy strips or, adventure strips, but just the little ones. And then other comics creators who were working on 2000 AD and some of those UK books. And even some of the football and war comics, they were getting involved as well. So it seemed then more relevant for people like me
Hmm.
because there was that kind of not change in the industry, but that point at which all the old UK comics began to give way to the to the newer stuff like 2000 AD.
Mhm.
So it was quite an exciting time to be there. And some of the people who I met, I think even before I'd had any published work, yeah, certainly before I'd had any published work, were Dave Gibbons, David Lloyd, Alan Moore, um, Alan Davis was fairly new in on the scene then. Um, Neil Gaiman was just coming into comics.
Mhm.
So there were
Mhm.
some, people who eventually did become big players in the industry, but they were incredibly helpful. That was around about the time that Warrior came out. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that's, when David Lloyd and Alan Moore were developing V for Vendetta. And so it's that kind of era.
Yeah.
Um, and David Lloyd was a huge help because he's very much a people person. He was really helpful to young people who wanted to get into the industry, and he'd talk to them about what they're doing and give them advice about techniques or things to consider. And Dave Gibbons as well. I can remember when the first time I turned up to one of those meetings, I took my portfolio of sample artwork with me, and Dave Gibbons, I didn't even know who he was at the time, but he was just flicking through my portfolio and sort of giving me feedback. But I was young and fragile, and I didn't take the feedback particularly well. But
Right.
he was
Right.
okay with the fact that I was being a bit, thinking my work was better than it was. But that was very valuable time, very valuable. I'm very much, very grateful to the people that did kind of help somebody who was just trying to break into comics.
Yeah, yeah. As I mentioned before we hit record, I found so far most folks that I've talked with have been extremely kind. So that's it's a wonderful thing to have people along the way to support the journey. And I'm sure you've in turn supported others that
Yeah,
have come after you as well.
yeah, because we always remember what it's like to try and, you know, to kind of create for yourself opportunities within an industry which is a hard industry to get into.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, I think most creatives are not they're not necessarily very assertive people, so they just kind of find their way. They don't, I mean, some do turn up day one, I've arrived, and they're gonna,
Hmm.
they're gonna make it whatever. There's always people like that, and that's fine. But I would say a lot of them are not quite like that. They have a lot of ambition, but don't know how to actually present themselves in the best possible way.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so I know what that's like. So I help people as much as I possibly, yeah, as much as I possibly can. Um, and then beyond that, when I did start working in the industry, Steve White and Simon Furman, obviously both of which were editors at Marvel UK, and
Hmm.
then obviously I subsequently did a lot of work with Simon on Transformers and other projects. Um, Going forward from there, when I first started to work for Marvel US, um, Rob Tokar, who was the Transformers editor, he was great because he was quite young as well. He'd just been given the editorial role on Transformers.
Hmm.
I think the
Hmm.
first couple of issues I did of Transformers, it was still being edited by Don Daly, who was, a little bit longer in the tooth, more experienced. Rob was quite young. So when we met, we both felt like we were forging ahead as newbies.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Nel Yomtov was and is lovely guy. He was really, really very helpful. He was an
Hmm.
editor, and he coloured every single issue of the Marvel Transformers book as well.
A good
So
editor makes a big difference, I'm sure.
yeah, very, very helpful people. Great
Mhm.
comments from Ralph Macchio as well. He looked at some of my work when I was on X-Men Adventures, and he said you're one for a relatively new artist. He said you're one of the best storytellers I've ever seen in terms of how I laid out the pages.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which I think was not, I wasn't even deliberate on my part as such. It's just I'd absorbed so much,
Hmm. Hmm.
obviously, of good stuff that meant that good stuff that would then come out.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Uh, I imagine it helps to appreciate the medium in order to create in it. If it's where you want to be and you have that background and experience and you've seen thousands and thousands of pages as a reader.
yeah, Yeah. I also early on, before I ever got published, when I was, I guess, sort of in my teens, late teens, and then sort of early in at college, it wasn't by that time. It wasn't just American books I was looking at. I was looking at a lot of um, European stuff, like Mobius and
Hmm.
Drouet and the various people like that. Largely because at that time, like I say, it wasn't that easy to get hold of American books. So fortunately, I had to just because I was so hungry for it, I bought other stuff. So I just absorbed all sorts of different things, um, and a lot of cinema as well. I was a big fan of cinema, so that visual narrative was, I think, very much played into the kind of work that I was doing when I eventually started working in comics. It definitely
Yeah.
shows it, even in Transformers that long ago, was
Hmm.
getting how shots worked, what angles worked, how you could continue to have things hooked together visually so that it made sense
Yeah.
to the reader. Um, Rules are there to be broken, but if you're either not aware of the rules or if you are aware and you break them too much, you can very easily lose the reader. They
Hmm.
get confused. But I think it just becomes so, like I say, largely unknowingly, it becomes so inherent in me to do it that way, to
Hmm.
to follow those kind of rules, even though I wasn't necessarily aware that they were rules. I mean, I am now, and you but so yeah, just absorbed an awful lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you still absorbing comics? I notice your shelfie back there. You have Venom kind of pulled out, still reading in the medium.
No, I don't. No, that's only because they sent me that free because it was yet another reprint of my Venom work. I mean
Yeah.
that cover has become iconic now. I mean,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
the original. People have offered me so much money for the original of that, but it's like, no, I'm all right. I want to keep something for to leave to
Yeah,
the family.
absolutely.
But the truth is, I don't read comics all that much anymore. I'm so much more involved in film and TV that no, I don't read a lot. I mean, I if I do buy any comic stuff, it's I don't know, it's slightly different things, like more this kind of thing.
Oh yes, yeah, definitely.
I mean, I just like to find something a bit different,
Yeah.
just not for the art, not just for the art, but also for the storytelling. Because I think although my appreciation of comics before I got into the industry was a bit broader with European stuff. Over the years after that, when I was working in comics, it became so Marvel centric,
Hmm.
you know, really, because I was trying to plow a career furrow, to get to the big books, that
Yeah.
I lost kind of sight of other stuff that was going on. So, in my later years,
Yeah. Yeah. I
happens.
love the wide reading. Blankets is amazing. It really is.
You know, I love the subtlety of those. I mean, I don't work much in comics now, but I write and draw. I'm just finishing my second graphic novel, and I like slower, more considered, deeper, um, not necessarily overly, not obviously over complex, but
Hmm.
layered and nuanced.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like life isn't all noise and color, but it is very complicated under the surface.
True. Very true. Curious about what you are working on right now, the creative directions that you're taking and the projects that have your creative attention.
Yeah. So three areas, I guess. So professionally, the paid work I do is storyboarding. So I've been working mostly as a storyboard artist for the last 15 years, I think. So storyboarding for film and TV, doing animation storyboarding and live action storyboarding, and I tend to kind of leapfrog, between the two.
Hmm.
So I'll spend a period of time working on just like preschool kids show, animated preschool kids shows, which I love because they're just so peaceful and gentle, and
Yeah.
uh, some of that being some of the Moonbug properties, which is all on YouTube, which gets insane amount of viewing figures.
Hmm.
Some of it's you know I've done a couple of Netflix shows, a lot of more UK based shows for the BBC and ITV. The Clangers. Have you ever heard of the Clangers?
No, no, I haven't.
I think so. This was a classic old British animated, stop motion animated TV show that was on when I was a child.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and I'd done a little bit of Clangers work sort of relatively recently, and then they asked me to storyboard the 50th anniversary episode of the Clangers
Oh, nice,
because
nice.
they brought it all back. There was a new Clangers. So the original narrator, because the characters aren't voiced, they make funny little noises, but it's all narrated.
Uh-huh.
So the original narrator back from the late 60s had, long since passed on, I think. So when they brought it back in its latest incarnation, the UK version was voiced by Michael Palin,
Mm-hmm.
ex
Hmm.
Monty Python, and trips around the world and all that kind of thing. But then they had it revoiced for the American market, and it's voiced by William Shatner,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
which I thought was a fantastic choice. Um, so I thought, oh, finally, I've worked on a show with William Shatner. How cool is that?
There it is. Yeah. You are my 6 degrees of separation. There it
Yeah,
is.
there we go. But
Nice.
what I found really bizarre, I was saying about how I can tend to kind of leapfrog between kid shows and then live action, more adult shows. So I literally backed one of the most amusing back to backs was I did the Clangers 50th anniversary, like kids, sweet little kids show. And then
Hmm.
the work I was doing straight after that was Luther with Idris Elba,
Yes, yeah.
season 5. And then I'll be back to some other little kiddie show, and then I'll be on to Invasion for Apple TV. It's just
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. I love the range. Love that.
yeah, yeah.
You also mentioned you're working in graphic novels right now as well.
Yeah, so other than the storyboard work, which is the kind of paid gigs that I get, um, my own graphic novel. So a few years ago, I wrote the first writing I'd ever done. I had an idea for a graphic novel,
Hmm.
which I spoke to quite a few writers about because I could like plot it and I knew I could draw it, but I wasn't a writer. Um, so I took it to a few people. I even spoke to Simon Furman about it, and various versions of that we kind of played around with. And then in the end, the writer that was almost going to do it was going to work on it, with me. He still didn't quite get what it was I was trying to do. And he said, I
Hmm.
think you need to write it. I said, I can't write it. And then a good friend of mine, Sarah McIntyre, she's a writer and artist, does mostly children's books. She said to me, well, just write it. She said, you know the characters, you know the story, just put the words into them out.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I absolutely loved the process. And it took me about 5 years to do it, but eventually finished my first book called Horizon, self-published. And, I sell it at conventions, sell it online, got
Hmm.
great feedback, sent it off to various people, I sent a copy to Dave Gibbons, and he gave me a lovely little quote, just
Nice.
to help promote it. And Will Gompertz, I don't know if you'd be aware of him in the US, but Will Gompertz was the arts editor for the BBC,
Hmm.
and now he's creative director at the Barbican in London. Just various people, give me some lovely feedback. So I thought, well, I must be doing something right then.
Definitely.
Um, and then for the last 3 years, I think I've been working on my next book, which is nearly finished, called Oxygen.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and they're both very different. Horizon is more, um, emotional fantasy drama. The main protagonist is a 15-year-old girl. It's got touches of Alice in Wonderland, but it's far more contemporary.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
guess, elements of maybe the Matrix in there, or What Dreams May Come, that Robin Williams film.
Oh yeah.
I
Hmm. The
think very
Richard Matheson. Yeah.
existential. I like a bit of existential angst.
Yeah.
Um, and then the second one has some similar threads to it, but it's very definitely sci-fi. So um, this occurred to me the other day. It's kind of The Martian, as in it's a lone astronaut on a planet,
Hmm.
essentially,
Hmm.
kind of narrative. So a singular journey narrative. Um, but going through experiences on this particular journey, which enable him to have huge breakthroughs about who he is. And the other point in the narrative, that he has no idea who he is. He doesn't know why he's there. He has no memory of anything that's happened to him before he crash landed on this planet.
Hmm.
And then there's a huge resolve at the end, and we understand everything that he's encountered, why he encountered those things, and what the conclusion to this whole journey is. So I love those kind of mystery linear narratives, that the character, things are not what you think they are, and then when
Yeah.
you get to the end, you kind of unpick it, like
Hmm.
with hindsight, you unpick it and you think, oh right, yes, oh
Hmm.
that's why that happened, oh right, yeah,
Yeah, I love that too. Love that
big
use of
reveal.
plotting. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I love doing it, really, really love doing it. um and I think for me, um, because it's not my source of income, and because it's so much easier for creatives to produce products these days. I mean, we've always been able to write and draw or paint or play music or whatever, but now you can publish all those things,
Hmm.
or at least get them printed and sell them at conventions, whatever. It's just, so it's nice to get your creative projects out there. And because that is available, I thought, well, I'm just going to do it anyway. It's not, you know, if a major publisher picked it up, great. But if not, that's not the point. It's like, it's the doing of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And once it's done, it's real in the world. And whatever happens to it after that is whatever happens.
Right.
But just to give it existence, I think is, as a creative, you have to give existence to the fire that burns in your belly.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
do anyway.
It has to come out somewhere. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
So if folks want to check out Horizon and Oxygen, where is the best space online to check those out?
The initial best space is just go to my website, so apwildman.com.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's easy to bump into. You just put Andrew Wildman into the internet and you'll bump into some. But AP Wildman, they're both there. I mean, you can buy copies of Horizon on there. Horizon's on Amazon as well.
Hmm.
The full
Hmm.
title is Horizon: A Long Way to Fall. If you put that in, you'll find it on Amazon. Um, but yeah, go to the website and there's information on there. And like I say, Oxygen is nearly finished. I'm doing it as 7-part separate issues, but then it's going to be collected as a graphic novel. I did a
Nice.
Kickstarter campaign which finished a month ago, 2 months ago, um, to collect it all as a graphic novel. So I'm just finishing the final chapter, and then that'll all come together.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Andrew, glad to share about your work. Glad to talk with you anytime, and always glad to feature you on the podcast. I appreciate your time so much.
No, thank you very much. It's great to you know share what I'm on about, and
Yeah,
also the journey of how I got here. I guess that's always interesting because everybody's journey is slightly different.
very true, very true, and hopefully encouraging to people out there who are presently on their own journeys.
Yes, very much
Yeah,
so.
yeah,
Excellent.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.